The collapse of the Soviet Union stands as one of the most dramatic and earth-shaking events of the 20th century. For decades, the USSR was one of the world's most powerful nations, a superpower whose influence stretched across the globe. Its vast territory was unmatched, covering 1/6 of the Earth's land surface. With a Red Army of 5 million soldiers backed by an unstoppable steel torrent of tanks and armored vehicles, it could have potentially overrun Western Europe or pushed southward into China at any moment. The Soviet military possessed a formidable arsenal, advanced fighter jets, submarines, nuclear weapons, and cutting-edge technology. Its nuclear stockpile alone was enough to destroy the planet several times over. Because of this immense strength, Soviet leaders boldly proclaimed that they would bury capitalism. These were not empty words. Yet between 1985 and 1991, just 6 short years, the Soviet Union disintegrated without any foreign invasion, without a bloody revolution, and without military intervention. How could such a mighty superpower crumble almost overnight? To understand this, we must examine the deep-rooted problems in its political system, economy, and external pressures. First, the institutional flaws were critical. The Soviet Union was a highly centralized, one-party authoritarian state where everything depended on the will of the top leadership. This structure fostered rampant bureaucracy. Power flowed strictly from the top down, leading to low efficiency and sluggish decision-making across the government. After the establishment of Soviet Russia, the country adopted a planned economy that concentrated all national resources on national defense and heavy industry. Through a series of 5-year plans, the state extracted resources from agriculture to fuel rapid industrialization. By the Stalin era, the USSR had indeed become extremely strong in military production. However, this economic model was dangerously lopsided. It relied overwhelmingly on the petroleum sector and heavy industry, making it vulnerable to collapse. Industrial production followed rigid state plans rather than market demands, resulting in chronic inefficiencies, either underutilization of resources or massive waste. By the 1970s, these structural problems had become severe. The extreme emphasis on heavy industry came at the expense of agriculture. Collective farms led to repeated poor harvests, forcing the Soviet Union to spend enormous amounts of foreign currency each year to import grain and other foodstuffs from the West. Decades of prioritizing heavy industry also caused severe industrial pollution, which took a heavy toll on public health. Life expectancy dropped significantly, and a host of social and economic woes mounted. Fortunately for the Soviets, the 1973 oil crisis provided a lifeline. When Middle Eastern producers cut off oil supplies to the West, global oil prices skyrocketed. The Soviet Union, sitting on vast reserves, benefited immensely. At the same time, major oil discoveries in Siberia dramatically increased export volumes. This combination turned the USSR into an overnight oil tycoon, flooding it with wealth. Beyond oil sales, many wealthy Middle Eastern nations were already major customers for Soviet arms. As oil revenues surged, they bought even more Soviet weapons. Flush with this unexpected windfall, Soviet leaders grew overconfident. They dramatically expanded defense budgets, rapidly boosted military capabilities to the point of challenging American dominance, and aggressively supported proxy forces around the world to advance Soviet interests. In 1979, they even launched a direct invasion of Afghanistan. Soviet elites basked in the glow of the oil boom era, gleefully watching capitalist nations in the West struggle with energy shortages. But there was a catch. By the early 1980s, Soviet luck began to run out. Siberian oil production started declining, and in 1981, Ronald Reagan was sworn in as U.S. president. Reagan was determined to wage economic warfare against the Soviet Union. A key part of this strategy involved Saudi Arabia, which found itself in a precarious position. To the north, Iraq and Iran were locked in the brutal Iran-Iraq war, with fighting that could easily spill over. Iran's Islamic Revolution under Ayatollah Khomeini was actively stirring up Shia populations inside Saudi Arabia, threatening the oil fields. To the west, Syria and Libya in North Africa maintained close ties with Iran and sought to undermine the Saudi royal family. Most alarmingly, the Soviet presence in Afghanistan to the northeast raised fears of encirclement from the north, east, and south by Soviet-aligned forces and leftist governments in South Asia and the Horn of Africa. The Saudi regime appeared highly vulnerable. At this critical moment, the United States stepped in with substantial military aid, bolstering Saudi security and deepening their dependence on America. Ignoring Israeli objections, the U.S. sold advanced fighter jets and other sophisticated weaponry, including Stinger missiles, and stationed technical experts and military advisors in the kingdom. Publicly, Washington claimed it sought nothing in return. However, during a visit by the Saudi king to the United States in February 1985, American officials first reassured the Saudis of protection and then subtly suggested that lower oil prices would benefit the U.S. economy. That same summer, Saudi Arabia dramatically ramped up production, from about 2 million barrels per day to 9 million. The result was a collapse in global oil prices, plunging from around $30 per barrel to about $12, and eventually even lower to around $8. The Soviet Union suffered a devastating blow, losing roughly $10 billion in oil revenue almost overnight, nearly half of its foreign trade income from petroleum. Additionally, its major arms customers among oil-producing nations like Iraq, Iran, and Libya were also hit hard, slashing their purchases and costing the Soviets another $2 billion. These twin shocks pushed the Soviet economy back decades in a single blow. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, often noted for his distinctive birthmark, came to power and inherited this crisis-ridden mess. To address the economic woes, he launched a series of reforms, including the ambitious 500 Days Plan, which aimed to fix decades of accumulated problems in just 500 days. Meanwhile, the United States did not relent. It intensified pressure on Western banks and governments not to extend loans to the USSR, further worsening the economic situation. Under duress, Gorbachev engaged in negotiations with Reagan, seeking relief from economic sanctions. The Americans insisted on human rights improvements and gradual liberalization before any concessions. Reluctantly, Gorbachev initiated political reforms, easing restrictions on freedom of speech and religion, allowing greater public participation in politics, and enabling oversight of government actions. However, once the political restraints were loosened, the floodgates opened. Soviet republics and Eastern European satellite states began pushing to break free from Moscow's control. In 1989, Poland held national elections in which the Solidarity Trade Union achieved a landslide victory, forming the first non-communist government in the Eastern Bloc since World War II. That November, crowds jubilantly tore down the Berlin Wall, an iconic moment marking the beginning of the Soviet withdrawal from Eastern Europe and a clear harbinger of the USSR's own collapse. 3 years earlier, the US CIA had begun supporting Afghan Mujahideen fighters against the Soviets, providing advanced weapons and training to groups that included Osama bin Laden's networks. The tide of war turned quickly. Soviet casualties mounted, forcing a humiliating withdrawal in 1989. The defeat in Afghanistan severely damaged Soviet credibility in the eyes of its own republics. Meanwhile, half-hearted economic reforms failed miserably. Living standards plummeted further, sparking political strikes, protests, and worsening ethnic conflicts across the country. Nationalist movements gained momentum, directly challenging central authority and demanding democratic reforms and independence. The 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, took the lead, and the wave of separatism became unstoppable. A cascade of independence declarations ultimately tore the Soviet Union apart. It must be acknowledged that the United States demonstrated remarkable strategic acumen. Through economic warfare, rather than direct military confrontation, winning without fighting, it helped bring down a rival superpower. This triumph elevated Ronald Reagan's legacy to new heights. In historical rankings of U.S. presidents, Reagan consistently ranks in the top 5, a testament to how difficult it was to defeat the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991, many classified documents were gradually declassified amid the ensuing chaos. One intriguing revelation involved a Soviet spy known by the codename Perseus. According to the files, this individual had infiltrated the Manhattan Project at a U.S. national laboratory, stealing critical atomic bomb secrets that enabled the Soviets to develop their own nuclear weapons far more rapidly. Yet, when researchers searched CIA records, no trace of Perseus could be found. Western intelligence agencies appeared strangely unfamiliar with this major Soviet operative.
In conclusion, the Soviet collapse was not the result of a single event, but a perfect storm of internal contradictions, rigid central planning, over-militarization, environmental degradation, and political repression, exacerbated by shrewd external pressures, particularly the oil price manipulation and support for anti-Soviet forces. What had once seemed an eternal empire vanished in just a few years, reshaping the global order and marking the end of the Cold War. This episode offers enduring lessons about the fragility of authoritarian systems when faced with economic realities and the power of strategic patience in international affairs.